We thought the signal was geological noise, but ancient legends don't transmit data, and rocks don't broadcast DNA. On Meridia IV, a first contact mission uncovered evidence of ancient aliens who don't build cities, they build ecosystems. This sci-fi short story asks one question: what if the planet itself is watching you? The silence of the void is a lie we tell ourselves to feel safe. Space isn't silent, it hums. It vibrates with the background radiation of dead stars and the gravitational groans of gas giants. But here, in the shadow of Meridia IV, the hum was different. It was a frequency that rattled the fillings in your teeth, a low thrumming dread that seemed to emanate from the planet itself. My name is Elara Vance, xeno-cartographer, and I stood on the observation deck of the celestial arbalest, my hands gripping the cold titanium railing until my knuckles turned the color of old bone. Below us, or above, depending on your orientation relative to the galactic plane, hung the world that would likely kill us, Meridia IV, the severed world. A tidally locked nightmare where the sun never sets on one hemisphere and never rises on the other. To the east, a blistering hellscape of magma oceans and cracked tectonic plates, forever baked by the angry red glare of its parent star, Kepler 186. To the west, a cryo-frozen tomb of eternal night, where the atmosphere had solidified into nitrogen glaciers miles high. And there, sandwiched between the fire and the ice, was the ribbon, the terminator, the twilight strip, a narrow band of perpetual dusk where the temperatures canceled each other out just enough to allow liquid water, and perhaps life. It was a scar of habitability on a corpse of a planet. Atmospheric density is reading 40% higher than the probes predicted, said a voice behind me. It was Dr. Eris Thorne, our lead exobiologist. Thorne was a man who looked like he had been etched from granite and polished with sandpaper. He didn't walk, he marched. His presence was always an intrusion on my solitude. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes fixed on the chaotic swirl of clouds marking the ribbon. The probes were 50 years old, Eris. Climates shift, especially on a world where the weather is driven by the temperature differential of a blast furnace and a deep freeze. It creates a heat engine, Thorne muttered, stepping up beside me, the reflection of the planet dancing in his augmented retinas. The hot air rises on the day side, flows over to the night side, cools, sinks, and rushes back. We are looking at constant hurricane-force winds, a perpetual storm that encircles the entire globe, and we have to fly a dropship through it. That's why Captain Kale is flying and not you, I said, finally turning to face him. The bridge of the celestial arbalest was a cathedral of silence and light. The holographic displays bathed the crew in soft blues and ambers. Captain Seren Kyle sat in the command chair, a monolith of calm. He was plugging a neural shunt into the base of his skull, syncing his nervous system directly with the ship's thruster arrays. He was no longer just a man, he was the vessel. All hands, prepare for insertion. Kyle's voice resonated, not through the air, but through our subdermal comms, bypassing the ears entirely. Gravity well capture in T-2 minutes. Secure your gear. If you have anything loose, it becomes a projectile. If you have any doubts, swallow them. I strapped myself into the crash couch next to Thorne. The restraint harness hissed as it locked over my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs for a second before adjusting to my biometrics. Across the aisle, Jackson Flux O'Malley, our structural engineer and pilot of the rover, was chewing on a stick of synthetic ginger to settle his stomach. He looked pale. Flux was a genius with mechanics, but he had the constitution of a wet paper towel when it came to turbulence. "We're hitting the upper atmosphere," KL announced. "Angle of attack is steep. We need to punch through the shear layer quickly, or the thermal differential will shear the wings off." The celestial arbalest groaned. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was the sound of metal stressing under forces it was barely designed to withstand. The viewports were shuttered, replaced by high-fidelity screens showing the external camera feeds. The black of space was replaced by a violent, churning gray. We weren't just descending, we were diving into a blender. The ship shuddered, a violent lateral kick that slammed my head against the restraint padding. Alarms screamed, a cacophony of digital panic before Kael silenced them with a thought. Stabilizers at maximum. Kael's voice remained flat, devoid of fear. Rerouting auxiliary power to the structural integrity fields. Hold on. Through the camera feed, I saw it. The storm wall. It was a towering cliff of clouds, black and bruised purple, lit from within by constant strobing lightning. It looked like the mouth of a god waiting to swallow us whole. We weren't aiming for the ground. We were aiming for the eye of a needle within a tornado. The turbulence wasn't a vibration. It was a physical assault. My vision blurred. I could hear flux retching into a bag over the comms loop. Thorn was chanting something, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a formula for atmospheric drag. I closed my eyes and focused on the mission. We were here for the Chronos data, the geological history trapped in the ice-fire divide. But deep down, I knew we were here for something else. The hegemony doesn't fund deep space cartography missions this expensive just for maps. They were looking for the signal. Suddenly, the violence stopped. The roaring wind died down to a dull whistle. The crushing G-forces lifted.
"We are through the shear," Kael exhaled. "Deploying air brakes. Welcome to Meridia IV." The shutters retracted. I gasped. We were gliding over a landscape that defied logic. The sky above was a bruise of twilight, a permanent sunset of deep indigo and burning orange. To our left, the horizon glowed with the terrifying radiance of the dayside, a wall of white fire. To our right, the darkness of the void, studded with stars that looked too cold to shine. And below us, life. It wasn't green, it was a riot of violets, crimsons, and jet blacks. The flora here had evolved to absorb every possible photon of the weak, scattered light. Giant fern-like structures, easily 300 feet tall, swayed in the wind. But they weren't just swaying, they were moving. They were orienting their broad, flat leaves toward the distant sliver of sun, tracking the light with desperate hunger. "Look at the river," Thorn whispered, his fear forgotten, replaced by scientific avarice. A massive river of meltwater, fed by the glaciers of the nightside, roared through the jungle, steaming as it flowed toward the dayside, where it would eventually boil away into the atmosphere. It was the planet's coolant system. "Landing zone designated," Kael said. "The plateau near the river delta. It's high ground, rocky, stable. Flux, get the rover ready. We drop in 5. The landing gear touched down with a heavy thud, the hydraulic dampeners hissing as they absorbed the weight of the ship. We had arrived. The airlock cycled, depressurizing with a sharp hiss. I grabbed my helmet, a sleek omnisensory bucket that would filter out the toxic levels of sulfur dioxide and ammonia in the air. Atmospheric composition is breathable for short durations, but I wouldn't recommend it, Thorn said, checking his wrist comp. High heavy metal content in the dust. Keep your seals tight. We descended the ramp. The gravity was heavier than Earth standard, about 1.2 Gs. It made every step feel deliberate, every movement a negotiation with the planet. The sound hit me first. The wind. It was a constant, low-frequency howl, the sound of air rushing from the cold side to the hot side. It never stopped. It was the breathing of the world. The ground crunched under my magnetic boots. It was covered in a carpet of bioluminescent organisms that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. When I stepped on them, they retracted, rippling away from my footfalls like water. Bioreactive, I noted, recording into my log. The flora is sensitive to vibration, likely a defense mechanism against grazers. Or hunters, Flux muttered, lugging a heavy crate of seismic sensors. He looked better now that he was on solid ground, though the greenish tint to his skin hadn't fully faded. We set up base camp in the shadow of the ship. The celestial arbalest loomed over us, a dark geometric shape against the twilight sky. Captain Kale remained on board to monitor the weather patterns, which left Thorn, Flux, and me to explore the immediate vicinity. The mission parameters were clear: deploy the sensor grid, collect soil and tissue samples, and investigate the source of the magnetic anomaly that had brought us here. We boarded the rover, a 6-wheeled beast of a vehicle named the tardigrade. It was built to survive hell, and looking at the landscape, it needed to be. Flux took the wheel. Heading toward the anomaly, 3 clicks north along the ridge of the Meltwater Canyon. As we drove, the jungle grew denser. The trees, if you could call them that, were like twisted pillars of obsidian, topped with canopy leaves that looked like stained glass. The wind whipped through them, creating a mournful, flute-like melody. "Stop!" Thorn commanded suddenly. "Look at that!" Flux slammed the brakes. In the headlights of the rover, we saw it, a creature. It was massive, easily the size of an elephant, but low to the ground, with 6 thick legs and a carapace that looked like it was made of rock. It was using powerful claws to dig into the root system of a giant fern. "It's an herbivore," Thorn whispered, zooming in with the external cameras. "Look at the mouth parts, grinding plates. It's eating the mineral deposits on the roots." Suddenly, the creature froze. It raised its head, lacking eyes, but possessing large fan-like sensory organs on either side of its skull. It swiveled them toward the dark side of the horizon. "What is it doing?" I asked. "Listening," Thorn said. Without warning, the creature bolted. It moved with terrifying speed for something so large, crashing through the underbrush and disappearing toward the dayside. "Why did it run?" Flux asked, his hand hovering over the rover's defense grid. "Because of that," I said, pointing to the west. From the eternal night, a fog was rolling in. But it wasn't just fog. It was a wall of flash-freezing air, a tendril of the cryosphere breaking containment. The temperature gauge on the dashboard plummeted. "Thermal drop detected," the computer warned. "Temperature falling by 20 degrees per minute." "Drive!" I shouted. "It's a cold snap!" Flux didn't need telling twice. He gunned the engine, the electric motors whining as the tardigrade tore up the dirt. The frost chased us. I watched on the rear monitor as the jungle behind us turned white instantly. The bioluminescent moss went dark. The giant ferns shattered like glass as the water inside their cells froze instantly and expanded. "We can't outrun it on this terrain," Flux yelled, fighting the steering wheel as we bounced over boulders. "Head for the thermal vents." Thorn pointed to a cluster of steam plumes rising from a fissure in the ground ahead. "The geothermal heat will create a buffer." It was a gamble. If the vents were too hot, they'd melt the tires. If we didn't make it, we'd freeze to death in seconds. Flux slewed the rover sideways, drifting around a massive rock formation, and punched it toward the steam. We slammed into the cloud of vapor. The windows fogged up instantly. The temperature gauge stabilized, then began to climb. We sat there, panting, listening to the wind howl outside. The ice storm hammered against the hull, sounding like handfuls of gravel being thrown at a tin roof. "Too close," I said. "The weather models didn't predict a cryosurge this far into the ribbon. The biosphere is unstable." "Or it's reacting," Thorn said, his eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. "The planet isn't just a chaotic system, Elara. It's a responsive one." We waited an hour for the surge to pass. When we emerged, the landscape behind us was a glittering graveyard of ice. But ahead, the twilight jungle remained untouched. We pressed on toward the anomaly. We reached the coordinates 2 hours later. It wasn't a magnetic deposit. It was a structure. My heart hammered against my ribs. "That's artificial." It was a spire, composed of a smooth black material that seemed to absorb the light. It rose from the center of a crater, pulsing with a faint, rhythmic blue light. It looked like a needle driven into the heart of the world. "This isn't hegemony tech," Thorn said, his voice trembling.
It's not human. We suited up and exited the rover. The air around the spire was still, strangely unaffected by the constant wind. As I approached, I felt a buzzing in my head, a pressure behind my eyes. It's a transmitter, I realized, but broadcasting what? And to whom? I reached out to touch the surface. It was warm. As my gloved finger made contact, the spire flared. A holographic projection erupted into the air above us. It wasn't a star map. It was a DNA helix. But it was wrong. It was triple-stranded. "The Weaver!" Thorn gasped. "The myth! It's real!" The Weaver was an old spacer legend, an ancient alien race that didn't conquer worlds with fleets, but with biology. They seeded planets, terraforming them not with machines, but with tailored ecosystems. "This planet isn't a geological accident," I whispered, the realization dawning on me with the weight of a collapsing star. "The tidal locking, the ribbon, it was engineered. This entire world is a petri dish, and we just contaminated the sample." The ground beneath us shook, not a tremor, but a heartbeat. "Kale to landing party," the captain's voice cut through the static, urgent and sharp. "Get back to the ship, now. Seismic activity is spiking off the charts. The entire tectonic plate is shifting." "We found something, Captain," Thorn yelled into his mic. "We need time to scan it." "You don't have time," Kale barked. "The storm wall is collapsing. The day side and night side are mixing. We're looking at a global hypercyclone. ETA, 10 minutes. We ran. We scrambled back to the rover, but the jungle had changed. The plants were no longer passive. The roots were writhing, unearthing themselves. The ecosystem was waking up to defend itself. Flux floored the accelerator. The drive back was a nightmare. The sky had turned a bruised purple, and lightning arced horizontally across the ground. The wind was so strong it threatened to flip the rover. "The river!" I shouted. "The meltwater river is flooding!" A wall of boiling water was rushing down the canyon, a flash flood of biblical proportions, triggered by the tectonic shift. "I can't cross it!" Flux screamed. "The bridge is gone!" "We have to jump it," Thorn said insanely. "Use the rock ramp on the left." "Are you crazy? That's a 50-meter gap." "Do it or we drown in boiling mud," I yelled. Flux gritted his teeth, yelled a curse that would make a dock worker blush, and slammed the throttle. The tardigrade roared, hitting the ramp at top speed. For a second, we were airborne, suspended in the violent twilight. Below us, the churning brown water raged. We slammed into the far bank, the suspension screaming. Tires blew out. The rover spun, skidding to a halt mere feet from a cliff edge. "Out! Move!" I kicked the door open. The celestial arbalest was visible in the distance, its engines spooling up, glowing blue in the gathering dark. The ramp was down, waiting for us. We sprinted the last kilometer. The wind was now strong enough to knock a person down. I saw Kale standing at the top of the ramp, bracing himself against the gale, waving us in. Thorn fell. A vine, thick as a python, had lashed out and wrapped around his ankle. He screamed as it dragged him backward. "Eris!" I skidded to a stop, drawing my laser cutter. "Leave me! Get the data to the ship!" he yelled, clawing at the dirt. "Not on my watch." I lunged forward, slicing the vine. It recoiled, spraying a caustic blue sap. I grabbed Thorn by the harness and hauled him up. We stumbled toward the ship, the world ending around us. We hit the ramp, and Kale hauled us inside. "Seal it!" The airlock slammed shut, muffling the roar of the storm. We collapsed on the deck plates, gasping for air. "Take off!" Kale shouted to the ship's AI. "Emergency burn!" The celestial arbalest lurched. We were heavy, fighting the gravity and the downdraft of the cyclone. The ship groaned, metal screaming against the stress. "Warning, hull integrity at critical," the computer droned. "Punch it!" Kale roared, overriding the safety limiters. The main thrusters ignited with a force that pinned me to the floor. We shot upward, punching through the storm clouds. The lightning lashed at the hull, blinding us even through the external cameras. And then, silence. We broke the atmosphere. The stars returned. The violence of Meridia IV fell away, replaced by the cold indifference of space. I unbuckled and crawled to the viewport. Below us, the planet was a swirling marble of chaos. The ribbon was gone, swallowed by the mixing storms of fire and ice. "We lost the sight," Thorne whispered, staring down at the world. "The spire, it's gone." "But we have the scans," I said, patting the data drive in my pocket. "We know what this place is." Cale turned his chair to face us. He looked tired, older than he had that morning. "We survived. That's enough for today. Set course for the relay station. The hegemony needs to know." As the ship turned away from the severed world, I looked back one last time. I could see the line of the Terminator, the twilight strip reforming as the storm settled. Life would go on down there, in the dark and the light. The Weaver's experiment continued. And somewhere, in the deep jungle, the eyes of the planet were watching us leave. The Weaver's experiment isn't over, and neither are these stories. Subscribe for more original science fiction, and like the video if you want to keep uncovering what's hidden in the dark between the stars.